Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the 119th chapter of the book of Psalms. The 119th Psalm can claim the distinction of being the longest by far chapter book in all of the Bible. It is 176 verses, and the way that that number is determined is because it is what is known as an acrostic. This is a poetic literary device where each letter of 8 verses. There are stanzas of 8 verses, each of it which begin in a letter in the alphabetical order in which they appear in the Hebrew language. There are 22 letters in the Hebrew language. Vowels are categorically excluded. So the two we're going to be covering today is the first two. This is the first 16 verses, Aleph and Beth. These are the Hebrew equivalent of the A and B in their language. And the 119th Psalm, like every other psalm, is a devotional, but unlike it, it is perhaps best read and was not meant to be sung or recited by its sheer length. So I feel that this psalm, you really have it demands patient and meditative reading. I'm in the practice of reading 5 psalms a day, and every 24th of the month I almost dread having to read this psalm in its entirety, but once I get in, I'm always better off for it. It's just the longest devotional day in the calendar I've sort of set up for ourselves. But this is an intensely personal and poignant psalm. All but 14 verses are dedicated to Yahweh, and the emphasis on his nature and character is not on his creation, redemption, or sovereign rule as it is in most other Psalms, but this is on the psalmist's love for the law and the revelation of Yahweh as revealed in the law. The law was a form of special revelation. It was a distinct mark of identity to the Hebrew people. It made them unique, privileged, also demanded responsibilities, but they had this law which was to govern their conduct, their worship, their secular law, their interactions with others, and their relationship with God, and no other nation had this. And so the most plausible conjecture, the author is unidentified, but we personally think that it was post-exilic and priestly because the emphasis of the law would have been inflated by the post-exilic period. The idolatry in Israel was effectively purged out as a consequence of the exile, and I'm personally partial to the possibility that Ezra wrote this psalm, but I have no way of proving that, so I'm just going to put it out there, but qualify that it is speculation and not as fact. And as we earlier mentioned, there are 8 verses per stanza, so each of the 8 verses begin with, the first one we're going to cover begin with the Hebrew letter Aleph, and the second of which begin with their letter Beth, though in the English language there's no way of telling that, but there are also 8 terms which are used throughout the 119th Psalm. In every stanza they are law. This is, the plenary whole. Then there is laws, plural. These are the laws in plural form. There are statutes, there are precepts, there are commands or commandments, ordinances, decrees, and word. And in each stanza, a few of them have all 8, but none of them have less than 6. And there's a different order in each stanza. So we just want to bear that in mind, and we're going to explain what some of these terms mean as we progress in our verse-by-verse commentary and analysis. That being said, there's not anything else we need to add, although we may retrospectively wish we had, but we're going to hop right into it. First verse, 119th Psalm. Blessed are the perfect in the way, who walk in the law of Yahweh. So this is what is known as a beatitude. A beatitude is a pronouncement of blessing. So when we think of the Beatitudes plural, the range of Matthew 3 through 12 all begin with blessing. They are pronouncing of blessings. Those are the Beatitudes. But there are individual Beatitudes throughout the Scripture. In the book of Revelation, the book of Psalms begins with the Beatitude. Blessed are those who do not associate with the wicked or sit in the counsel of the scornful, but their delight is in the law, their heart delights to meditate on the law of Yahweh, and that is what this psalm, the 119th one, is very much about. It is about the enriching relationship between the law and what walking in it. Now, walking means if you walk in something, that means you live, you live into it. So the law determines the steps that we take and the path that we embark on. And none of us are perfect in the way. We are all imperfect. We are all sinful. But there was one who was perfect, and that was the one through whom we may be rendered blameless, and the Father, as we read of in Ephesians 1:4. That someone, of course, is Yahshua Messiah. But the law, there is nothing wrong in the law itself. The problem is in legalism, and the problem is the law obeyer, because none of us can obey the law perfectly. The law is a perfect, absolute, objective standard, which imperfect human beings are incapable of fully honoring and obeying, but is still a revelation of divinity. It's only I'm not saying there's no value in studying it or trying to live by it. Just don't try to work out your salvation by obeying the law, because it never works. Blessed are those who observe his witnesses, who seek him with all their heart. So this is another beatitude, and this one is pronounced on those who observe. That means they perceive with the senses and intuit with the mind his witnesses. And statutes is perhaps the more familiar translation of witnesses, and that comes from the Hebrew word adat, which roughly translate as covenantal stipulations. And so the law is a weapon. It's not a weapon. It is a tool of divinity, and a tool. It's to tool's value. You can use a hammer to nail in the door of a wall, or to build a wall or a building, or you can use it to bash someone over the head. The law is not for the sake of the judgment of an angry, wrathful deity, but it is his tool to use us to build our ways and be better with him. We have to seek him with all our heart, and if we seek, we shall find. If we will knock, it will be open. Revelation 3:20. And if we seek him, we will find him. We are guaranteed this in Deuteronomy 4:29 and Jeremiah 29:13. So if you have to seek him with all the heart, engage all your faculties and all their capacities. There's nothing automatic. There's nothing unconditional to seeking him, to finding him. We have to seek in order to find, but we have to seek in the right way, seek with diligence, seek with integrity, seek with sincerity, seek it as in accordance to the directions that he provides for seeking him, and we will find him. Even they shall do no unrighteousness, they shall walk in his ways. So the blessing of obeying the law is that you do not commit unrighteousness, sin. That's another way of putting it, a violation of the law. The Greek, our word sin derives from a Greek archery term. It means missing the mark, and the law establishes the mark by which sin is criteria. So the law exists to expose our sin. The mirror cannot cleanse the dirt that it can expose. But ways in this ways is covenantal requirements. So they speak of the covenantal path is a way. We in the new covenant, we more frequently refer to the straight and narrow path of salvation, and the way was incidentally what before Christianity became known as Christianity, was known as the way. And of course, Yahshua is the way, the truth, and the life. So we have to walk in his ways, and that requires us to renounce and repudiate our own self-centered inclinations. We have to voluntarily surrender to walk in his ways. This means we forsake our immediate gratification and cling to the law, or the moral precepts therein. You have commanded us to keep your orders diligently. So precepts is the more familiar translation of the word orders. It is from the Hebrew word pataquim, and it refers to covenantal regulations. So there are stipulations, requirements, and regulations in the past three verses. Regulations they regulate what one can and cannot do. And the reason that he would command us to keep his orders diligently is because if we do it half-heartedly or lazily, then we're not going to be able to do it. It's an all-or-nothing endeavor. We either do or you don't, and the only way we can honor our end of the law, none of us can do it perfectly, but in as much as we are able, is if we do it diligently. And he commands us. Now, why would he command us to do anything? Because he wants what's best for us. So he sets the highest standards and doesn't raise the bar, because he wants to give us the best that he has to offer. And in order to inherit the best, he calls us to our best. Oh, that my ways were established to keep your laws. So decrees is the word that is more frequently translated as laws, and this is from the Hebrew word hakim, which is the covenantal directives. So there are basically two elements of the law or the word. There are the directives and there are the promises. The psalmist praises both of these throughout there. But remember, these 8 covenantal terms, we're just coming them as they go. But, he's praying, so this is also a prayer that his ways were established to keep their law. The natural man is not naturally oriented or inclined to keep the law. They are wayward sheep, as established in the 176th and final verse of this psalm. But the psalmist did give his best effort, and we can benefit from his example. Then I would not be ashamed when I look into all your commandments. So if we expose ourselves as violators of the commandments, when we look at the 10 Commandments, we are all guilty of at least one, and he who breaks one breaks all of them. So they are a source of shame. The law does exist to expose our guilt, and it is good that we experience guilt. Guilt is to the conscience what pain is to the body. It's a negative sensation that teaches us to avoid it by following the same path, and then we can be proud when we are not ashamed. There's a difference between the sin of pride and the sensation of being proud. I thank you with uprightness of heart when I learn the just judgments of your righteousness. So not only does he thank him, but he thanks him in the right spirit. He has his heart in order to praise the one who he is thanking. So you have to have an upright heart before you express your gratitude and praise to the one who is perfect, and his righteousness is reflected in his judgments. So judgments is a species or manifestation or exponent of his righteousness. This is how he determines guilt and innocence and administers judgment or salvation, respectively. And we have to be thankful for the path of faith in grace, by grace through faith. I keep your laws. Oh, do not leave me entirely. So his concern is that he will be forsaken or abandoned by the one whose law, the one he is trying to keep himself closely connected to by following his ways and keeping his laws and honoring his directives. But this is a prayer, a cause for concern. Even if I backslide a little, don't leave me entirely, have your presence goading me back to your ways that I long to keep. This is a sincere desire to keep his laws, and it's also a sincere desire that, we can live for 42 days without food, we can live for 4 days without water, we can live for 8 minutes without air, but we cannot live a single second apart from the author and source of all life, which is God. Who is God? How would a young man cleanse his path? By keeping it according to the word. So this is the Beth section. So the first 8 verses correspond the original letter of each. We can't appreciate the nuances in our English language, but in the Hebrew original, they all begin with the word Aleph. So blessed, that word, or at least the word of choice there, begins with the Hebrew word of Aleph. We read that word twice, and the rest are mostly prepositions, but we're not familiar or fluent in the Hebrew language, so we're going to refrain from idle speculation. But to return to the Beth session, now this question, how would a young man cleanse his path, reminds me of something that the author of Proverbs asked. Who can say he has made his heart clean? So the word clean is pure, and who has purified? How can a young man purify his path when the path, there are obstacles and temptations literally all around him trying to get in? So how can we get rid of that ourselves? And the answer is that we cannot, but we can do our best to keep it according to his word. So his word offers us a way out of the world, and the world is a trap which leads to death and damnation and sin and Satan. I have sought you with all my heart. Let me not stray from your commandments. So because he had sought him with all his heart, all his faculties, and all their capacities, that is why he found him. So with seek and you shall be satisfied, look and you will find, knock and it will be open. These are promises throughout the Old and New Testament that we have to cling on to. And he's never far away. He is literally as close as the mention of his name, or he even indwells in our thoughts. So when you are thinking of him, he does become alive in your thoughts. The danger is when the wicked in his proud countenance in his heart does not think of God at all. Psalm 10:4. But his concern, again, is that he might forsake or abandon or go wayward or astray from the path, which is defined by the covenant. So if you stray from the covenants, that means you're off the road, the covenantal path. So if you stray, then you're not following the way. I have treasured up your words in my heart, that I might not sin against you. So we have to really take it to heart, and this is an expression of the law in his word. The law is part of the word, but it's the law as the Pentateuch, the books of Moses. The origin of the law can be traced to Mount Sinai. It was the special privilege of which I referenced earlier in the lesson, but it was still eternal, and the Jews of the post-exile, certainly this particular Jew would have treasured the word in his heart, and he would have been blessed for it. So he speaks of the blessing with the authority of firsthand experiential knowledge. So he is able to speak of the blessings of his intimate communion and close relationship in his fastidious observance of the law. So he can speak from personal experience. And if you don't treasure the word in your heart, then you're going to sin against him. So the word that I might not sin against you. So that means, he might sin, but he also might not, because we are sinners by choice and not by nature. Yet the law calls us to a different orientation from the natural man's orientation and inclination. Blessed are you, O Yahweh, teach me your laws. So he pronounces the blessing on the one who gives all blessing and all meaning and all purpose and all life and vitality. This is a beatitude directed to the source of blessings, and he wants to teach. They are his laws and not, so these are his personal property. He is the owner, he is the author and finisher of its components, and he is the teacher. What man can presume to even counsel him who is omniscient? So he is our teacher, and he is the best teacher. So a teacher who is not, informed with Yahweh through the Spirit cannot be an effective one of spiritual truth, and they cannot impart the blessings or speak with them as perhaps Ezra did. I know I shouldn't say that because I don't know that was his, but I'm personally partial to the possibility that Ezra wrote this. And he was a teacher of the law. He was a recognized authority, but he was submitted to a teacher. And his authority was delegated, and his gifts and abilities were sovereignly distributed by the Ruach Kadesh. With my lips I have recounted all the judgments of your mouth. So recounted, that just means to repeat over and over with the lips. Saying them out loud helps. Sometimes it's more meaningful to say your prayers out loud. There's benefit in the practice of hearing yourself talk as opposed to merely thinking. And a lot of people are verbal learners, others are visual. A lot of people see that they only need to read. Other people learn better from hearing. And you should have a Bible below yourself while you're watching these things, just to get all angles. But the justice are a specific component, the judgments, which are the specific component of his mouth that he meditates and ponders over. So the Hebrew word for meditate translates as mutter. The way that the ancient Jews meditated, and perhaps still do, was they muttered words repeatedly, and they meditated on them as they heard them. So the sound triggered the thought. Meditation was not a silent practice as it is for perhaps the Hindu and Buddhist, and myself personally. I have rejoiced in the way of your witnesses as over all riches. So riches have their value, they have their treasure, but they are perishable, they are corruptible, they will not last, they are fleeting, they are ephemeral, they are eternal. The way of his witness is eternal because it is connected to, emanates from, and points to, and originates from the one who is eternal. So when we rejoice in the way of his witnesses, we are rejoicing in the eternal and partaking of immortality in so doing. And we have to value these above all other riches. So this brings to mind the Savior's passage on kingdom priorities from Matthew 6:19 through 34. Where a man's treasure is, there his heart will be. So if we value and treasure the things of heaven above the items of earth, then our heart will be there and our treasure will be there. But if we invest in the riches, which the psalmist did not, he did not invest his security and future on perishable riches, but the imperishable treasure of the word of his witnesses, way of his witnesses. I meditate on your orders and regard your ways. So meditation, there is a misnomer that meditation is not a Judeo-Christian tradition. I recently did one, Christian meditation. You can type in that for more on that. But the psalmist, I think in the first psalm, he says the term meditate appears most prolifically throughout the book of Psalms, which are devotional hymns, which are mostly meant to be recited as prayer or in liturgical services. We read them as prose, but they were originally poetry and lyrical ones at that. But this psalm we earlier established is perhaps better read than sung or recited. There's no indication, there's no introduction to this one, so it's the introduction. Most psalms, the inspired writers technically begin with the introduction. They often identify the author, the historical context, the tune that it was sung to, and the musical instrument on which it accompanied. There's none of that stuff here. It just opens with the first one. We only have one more verse but if you regard all his ways, that means you will respect them if you are thinking of them constantly. And meditating is more than a superficial thinking upon. It is a prolonged, a contemplative act by which we meditate on something, and we can extract more information by concentrating on it in solace, security, and sanctuary of meditation than we can just from a superficial glance. But now we're going to read the 16th and final verse of today's lesson. I delight myself in your laws. I do not forget your words. So if you delight in it, you're not going to forget it. You're not going to forsake it. You're not going to fall out of practice or habit of doing the laws because you genuinely delight in them. And the law, they do seem painful on the surface. They call us to deny our own immediate gratification at times. But if we delight in the law for its own sake, for the comfort in the knowledge that we are in closer communion with our Maker, we are doing what He wants us to do and not what we want to do. That is a source of delight and pleasure in itself. And the temptation, the consequences of forgetting and forsaking the truth after coming to a saving knowledge of it are in fact more severe than if we died in ignorant sin. This is communicated in the New Testament in passages such as Hebrews 10:26-27 and 2 Peter 2:20-21. But that's all the time we have for today. We'll pick this up sometime soon. We'll make it all the way through eventually. Nothing's automatic, but that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon. Take care until then. Bye-bye.